I thought nailing Brenda Sterling's hide to the wall and turning that creek bed into a protected heritage site was the end of it. I thought I could finally get back to fixing my porch and watching the sun go down without seeing a neon vest on my property line. For about 6 months, I was right. The coyotes came back, the grass grew tall, and the only noise from Pinecrest Estates was the gentle hum of their pool filters. Dave, the new HOA president, even invited me to their 4th of July barbecue. I didn't go, let's not get crazy, but I sent over a bottle of decent bourbon as a peace offering. We had a truce, but I forgot the first rule of structural engineering. When you seal up one crack under pressure, the water just finds another way in, and usually, it's a lot deeper and harder to patch. It started in late October, the kind of crisp morning that makes you glad to be alive. I was out checking the fence line, iron habit now, when I saw them. Not an HOA landscaping crew this time, but 3 black SUVs parked on the county road bordering my southern perimeter. Men in expensive suits were standing in the ditch, looking at my land like it was a steak on a butcher's counter. I walked down there, my old hound dog blew at my heels and asked if they were lost. The guy in the lead, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck, just smiled that shark smile I'd seen 1,000 times in courtrooms. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, knowing exactly who I was. "I'm Conrad Ellis, representing Apex Land Development. We recently acquired the 50-acre parcel behind your property from a distressed seller." He meant Brenda. I almost laughed. "Good luck with that," I told him. "State says you can't build an access road through the creek. It's landlocked. Enjoy your expensive dirt." Ellis didn't even blink. "Oh, we know about the creek. Shame about those artifacts. But see, the county has a provision for landlocked utility necessity. If we can't go through the creek, we can petition for an easement by necessity." He pointed a manicured finger straight through the middle of my best pasture, the one where the old oak stood. "Right through there. We'll be putting in a 4-lane access road and high-voltage transmission lines. It's all perfectly legal. We filed the paperwork this morning. You'll get compensated, of course. Market rate for raw agricultural land." I stood there feeling the blood drain out of my face. They weren't just going to build a road. They were going to slice my 160 acres in half, pave over my peace and quiet, and put a highway 10 yards from my front porch. It was worse than the HOA. This was industrial-grade destruction wrapped in legal letterhead. "Over my dead body," I said, but it sounded weak even to me. Ellis just got back in his SUV. "Usually it's just a signature, Mr. Blackwood. Don't make it harder than it needs to be." I spent the next week in a rage, drowning in county archives. They were right. The easement by necessity statute was real. A leftover law from the 1800s meant to help farmers not get fenced in by spiteful neighbors. Now it was being weaponized by a billion-dollar corporation. I called Kenji at the state, but he was dead-ended. This wasn't environmental. It was purely civil property law. My lawyer told me we could fight it, but Apex had pockets deeper than the Marianas Trench, and they'd just bleed me dry in legal fees before paving over me anyway. I was sitting on my porch, nursing a lukewarm beer and watching the sunset over the oaks I was about to lose, when headlights pulled up. It was Dave from the HOA, looking pale. He walked up, no clipboard this time, just a terrified look on his face. "Jack," he said, "did you see the proposed route for those high-voltage lines?" I nodded grimly. "Yeah, right through my pasture." "Not just your pasture," Dave said, pulling a crumpled map out of his pocket. "Once they cross your land, they have to hook into the main grid. They're planning to run 100-foot steel transmission towers right along the entire eastern edge of Pinecrest. It'll tank our property values by 40%. The noise, the eyesore. Brenda's little jogging path idea was nothing compared to this. We're going to be living next to a power plant. That's when it hit me, the stress fracture. It wasn't on my land this time. It was the sheer scale of their greed. They were so focused on bullying the lone farmer that they didn't realize they were about to alienate 1,000 wealthy, highly litigious suburbanites. I looked at Dave, this guy whose manicured lawn I used to despise, and saw something new, an ally. "Dave," I said, standing up, "how much money does the Pinecrest HOA have in its legal defense reserve right now?" He blinked. "After we seized Brenda's shadow fund? About $750,000. I grinned. It wasn't a nice grin. "You want to stop these towers?" "More than anything," he said. "Then you don't need a lawyer yet. You need an engineer. We formed the unlikeliest coalition in county history, the grumpy hermit farmer and the beige army of Pinecrest Estates. I spent 3 nights going over the geological surveys for the entire area, stuff Apex had ignored because it was expensive to look at. I found what I was looking for in a survey from 1974. The route they wanted for those massive steel towers ran directly over a subterranean limestone karst system. Basically, a honeycomb of underground caves that were stable enough for grass, but definitely not stable enough for million-pound steel towers and a 4-lane road heavily trafficked by construction equipment. The county hearing was packed. On one side, Apex's army of lawyers in $3,000 suits. On the other side, me and my flannel Dave, and about 300 angry suburban soccer moms who were ready to riot if their property values dropped. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't talk about feelings or views. I just put the geological instability report on the overhead projector. "You build those towers there," I told the commissioners, pointing to the red zones on the map. "And the first time we get a heavy rain, you won't just have an access road. You'll have the world's most expensive sinkhole. And since you've now been formally notified of this structural defect," I looked directly at Ellis, "any collapse will be considered gross negligence, voiding your insurance." The color drained out of Ellis's face. It's one thing to bully a farmer. It's another to risk uninsurable catastrophic failure. The moms from Pinecrest started murmuring, then shouting. Dave stood up and promised that the HOA would file an immediate injunction based on my findings. Backed by their massive legal fund, Apex withdrew their petition 2 days later. It was too risky, too expensive, and too loud. They ended up selling the 50 acres to the state for a fraction of what they paid, to be added to the heritage site buffer zone. Yesterday, I was fixing that same spot on the porch. Dave walked by on his side of the fence. The 5-foot gap still there, but it didn't feel so wide anymore. He waved, I waved back. We weren't friends exactly. I still hated his HOA rules, and he still probably thought my barn needed painting. But we both knew that sometimes you need the guy with the manicured lawn to fund the fight, and sometimes you need the grumpy old engineer to find exactly where to swing the hammer. And as long as they stayed on their side of the fence, I figured that was just fine by me. I didn't buy the old Blackwood property because I wanted to be a farmer. I bought it because I wanted to be left the hell alone. After 30 years as a structural forensic engineer, spending my days arguing with contractors who tried to use sawdust instead of concrete, I was done with people, done with noise, and definitely done with rules that didn't make any structural sense. The Blackwood place was perfect. 160 acres of gnarled oaks, a creek that flooded every spring, and a house that looked like it might collapse if you sneezed too hard. But the best feature wasn't the land itself, it was the boundary line. My eastern fence sat exactly 5 feet away from the edge of Pinecrest Estates, a sprawling master-planned community where the grass was measured with rulers, and every house was the same shade of agreeable gray. I thought 5 feet was enough of a buffer, a demilitarized zone between my chaotic slice of heaven and their manicured purgatory. But I was wrong, because folks like that don't see boundaries. They just see things they haven't controlled yet. The first week was pure bliss. Just me, the coyotes, and the sound of a hammer hitting good. Honest wood as I started shoring up the front porch. I was drinking coffee on that half-finished porch when a pearl-white luxury SUV clean enough to eat off of crunched slowly up my gravel driveway. Out stepped a woman who looked like she had been professionally curated by an algorithm for suburban authority. Stiff blonde bob, oversized designer sunglasses, and a clipboard held like a weapon. This was Brenda Sterling, president of the Pinecrest HOA, though I didn't know her name yet. I just knew her type. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just walked up to the edge of the porch and tapped a manicured fingernail on her clipboard. "We need to talk about this debris," she said, gesturing vaguely to my entire property. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable before I told her she was trespassing. She didn't even blink. Just gave me this tight little pitying smile and said, "Oh, honey, you must have misunderstood the realtor, see? Pinecrest's charter has a visual harmony clause that extends to adjacent properties if they impact our property values. And frankly this," she waved at my half-repaired barn, "is an eyesore that's costing my homeowner's equity." I almost laughed. Told her my equity was none of her business and to get off my land before I called the sheriff. But she just turned on her heel, tossed a "you'll be hearing from us" over her shoulder and drove off, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume hanging in the dust. I figured that was the end of it, just standard suburban saber rattling. But 3 days later, a certified letter showed up stuck to my gate with blue painter's tape. because the mailman wouldn't even bring it up the drive. It was an invitation to comply, which is a fancy way of saying do what we say or else, demanding I paint my barn a specific approved color, Pinecrest beige, naturally, and pave my gravel driveway within 30 days, or face fines starting at $500 a day. They cited some obscure county ordinance about nuisance properties that they had conveniently reinterpreted. I didn't get mad right away, I just got focused. I drove into town, pulled the actual county ordinances, and confirmed what I already knew. Their visual harmony clause wasn't worth the paper it was printed on as long as I was zoned agricultural, which I was. I sent a polite, firmly worded letter back, attaching the county statutes and a vaguely threatening note about harassment, thinking logic would win the day. Big mistake. Logic doesn't work on people who are used to bullying their way into getting what they want. A week later, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. 3 guys in neon vests were on my side of the property line, ripping out 20 feet of my ancient split-rail fence. I ran out there half-dressed and fully furious, and the foreman just shrugged, handing me a work order signed by Brenda Sterling claiming emergency easement maintenance for a drainage issue that didn't exist. They weren't just maintaining an easement, they were effectively annexing a 10-foot strip of my land to widen their perimeter jogging path. That was the moment the switch flipped. I wasn't just annoyed anymore, I was at war. I didn't yell, didn't threaten them with a shotgun like they probably expected some crazy old hermit to do. I just took photos, lots of them, high-resolution, time-stamped photos of their faces, their equipment, and exactly where they were digging on my deeded land. I went back inside, made another pot of coffee, and called an old friend of mine, Kenji, who works for the state's Department of Environmental Quality. I told him, "Kenji, I think I might have a fiercely protected species of vernal pool fairy shrimp in that low creek bed near my eastern border, and I'm worried some illegal construction might wipe them out." Kenji knew exactly what I was doing, chuckled, and said he could have a surveyor out there in 48 hours to investigate. While I waited for Kenji's people, things got ugly. I came home from a hardware store run to find my new solar panels smashed, not just broken, but systematically destroyed with what looked like a sledgehammer. There were no tracks, but I knew who it was. Brenda had a son, a beefy kid named Kyle who drove a lifted truck and always looked like he was looking for a fight his mom could bail him out of. They were trying to break me, to make it so expensive and miserable to live there that I'd just sell the land to their developer buddies for pennies on the dollar. But they forgot one thing. I spent my career analyzing disasters, finding the one tiny stress fracture that brings a whole building down, and Brenda Sterling had a massive stress fracture in her little empire. She was greedy. I started digging, not into the dirt, but into public records, looking at every permit Pinecrest had filed in the last 5 years. I found it in a misfiled zoning application from 2019. Brenda didn't just want my land for a jogging path. She owned a shell company that had quietly bought the undeveloped 50 acres behind my farm, and the only way to connect that land to Pinecrest's utilities without spending millions was to run pipes right through my creek bed. She wasn't protecting property values. She was trying to steal an easement she didn't want to pay for. Armed with that knowledge, I didn't just want them off my land. I wanted to bury them. When Kenji's team arrived, they didn't find fairy shrimp, but they found something better. Evidence of historical indigenous artifacts in the creek bed where the HOA had started digging. It wasn't much, just enough arrowheads and pottery shards to trigger an automatic state-mandated construction halt. I watched from my porch with a pair of binoculars as Brenda showed up, while the state archaeologists were stringing up that beautiful red "Do Not Enter" tape. She was screaming, actually screaming at a state official, waving her arms like a panicked bird while the guy just calmly handed her a citation for unauthorized excavation in a protected zone. I didn't stop there, because a bully doesn't stop until they're on the ground. I filed a civil suit for the fence and the solar panels, but I also leaked Brenda's little shell company scheme to the other board members of Pinecrest. Turns out, they didn't know she was using association dues to fund illegal construction that would only benefit her private investment. The next HOA meeting, which I happily attended as an interested neighbor sitting quietly in the back row, was a bloodbath. Neighbors were shouting about special assessments they'd paid for drainage improvements that never happened, demanding to see the books, while Brenda stood up there sweating through her designer blouse, her perfectly curated facade cracking wide open. The end came swiftly after that. The state slapped Pinecrest with a massive fine for the illegal digging, Brenda was voted out in a humiliating emergency session and is currently facing an investigation for embezzlement. And as for Kyle, well, I'd hidden a high-definition game camera in an old oak tree that caught him swinging that sledgehammer clear as day. I didn't press charges. I just sent the video to Brenda with a note that said, "Resign," or "This goes to the sheriff," and she was gone by noon the next day. I kept the broken piece of solar panel and mounted it on my gate. A little trophy of the war I didn't start, but absolutely finished. The creek bed is quiet now, officially designated as a state heritage site, which means no one can ever build there, effectively landlocking Brenda's secret investment property and turning her $1 million scheme into a worthless patch of dirt. Sometimes I see the new HOA president, a nice enough guy named Dave who just wants to make sure the community pool is clean, waving nervously at me from across the boundary line. I wave back, then I go back to fixing my porch, enjoying the sound of silence that I finally, truly own. It makes you wonder, though, how many little tyrants like Brenda are out there right now, ruling their tiny beige kingdoms with fear just because no one has taken the time to find their stress fracture yet. Would you have settled quietly, or would you have burned it all down like I did?